Okay. We're just covering this as far as takes thief. There's another. How many people here watched the Mythbusters? How about the episode that they were dealing with the biometrics and the motion sensors? These things are just fun because they went through the biometrics. They were able to defeat it through the ballistics gel and the copying it to a piece of paper. But with the they had the infrared, and then they also had the acoustics, basically the sonic motion detectors as well. And they tried a few things like the good old Predator movie where the guy covered himself in mud and then tried to walk through. That, of course, didn't work because of the body temperature. They did a wetsuit. That didn't work for very long because of the body temperature. They did a wetsuit in the CO2 and basically cooled the guy down. Body temperature, of course, increased too hot. But what's funny was they were able to get a double-paned piece of glass. I think it was like a 6x6 frame with 2 panes in it, and then put it over the sensor, and it canceled out the sight, so it didn't see anything. And then the other one for the sonic, of course, it does the same thing as like Bat's vision or whatnot. The girl ended up making basically a huge Big Bird costume type scenario, to where it has this big fluffy strands of this carpet fiber, and of course it goes off almost immediately. But then they read somewhere on the internet, if you get a bed sheet, a thin one, it won't go off. So they were just joking, saying this won't work. They actually had this thin bed sheet, and then walked to the room relatively slowly. The thing didn't go off, and then she dropped it, instantly goes off. So this was the acoustic sensor. So I used the basically sonic off the individual objects. It bounces the sound off, and then the other one. Sorry. That'd be the sonic, yeah. So, but it comes down to with that one, they were able to bypass it with just a bed sheet, and then the other one they actually had to get a double-paned piece of glass, so they couldn't get the light to go through. So. You have to be careful with that one to get it in just right, or they were setting it off. Yeah. So. That was the biggest problem. Like, they were coming from above. Yes, because they were pretending to come in through some sort of like ventilation system or havoc. And then they also went through. How many people watched The Score? It was, I believe it was The Score, the one where they were trying to get the scepter. Yeah. So he was able to basically lance through this huge safe within a few minutes, 5 minutes or so, fill it up with water, and then explode it. Well, yeah, the time it took several hours and several basically pieces of material. They finally were able to lance through the safe, but everything inside of it was just completely fried because of the heat. But then they said, okay, that myth's busted, but let's see what will happen with a quarter stick of dynamite or however much they put in there. Yep. So they filled it up with water. It just wouldn't take because it wasn't waterproof. So then they basically said, okay. Then they finally got this insulation part and then put it all around the edges and finally made it waterproof, filled it up with water. And then whenever the explosive went off, it actually did a lot more damage than in the movie. So yeah, it was like 100 yards or so. Yeah, it was, they actually did the explosion at, I think it was a septic plant. So it's a huge one of those pools where all the reservoir stuff goes. And then basically what ended up happening when it shot out, it was almost it was more than 100 feet or so. It was a far distance. And so they were surprised the distance the door would fly. But the myth was busted because everything in there was fried to a crisp. And then the secondary thing was the safe was not waterproof. So it was leaking all over the place. But yeah, as far as intrusion detection systems, a lot of these things, going back to like the sonic or versus the infrared, is that you can bypass them. And same thing with like the pressure mats. And then again, you watch all these movies where the people are hanging from rafters and items like that, basically trying to prevent touching any of these pressure mats. Okay, securing mobile devices. This is a real fun thing as well. There's a large number of handhelds and laptops are stolen at airports. A lot of times, especially depending on the environment that you're in, you may have VIPs or C-level execs or upper management types. They'll have Blackberries or regular cell phones or regular handhelds, and they forget them in a taxi. They'll take them to a restaurant and leave them on the table at the restaurant. They'll leave them in the hotel. Or if they're going to a meeting, they'll leave their laptop in the hotel. Then they come back, and the laptop still may be there, but while they were gone, somebody broke into their room and copied their hard drive. So that's one thing that is a huge issue, especially in larger corporations and other entities, to where individuals definitely need to secure their data, especially encryption on data at rest. One method through securing a device is to have a lock-in cable that anchors the device to physical structure. You'll usually see this with laptops, mainly so people don't physically steal the laptop. But with the majority of laptops, a lot of times there's a screw on the bottom of the laptop. Once you undo the screw, you take out the hard drive. Now you have basically all the data that's on the drive. Okay, tracing software. Basically the call home feature. There's several pieces of things like this out there. I have a colleague up in Montana. He ended up buying a really nice gaming system that he was not only going to use for gaming, but pen testing, things like that, to where it had a huge hard drive, processor, and all that fun stuff. Well, what ended up happening was, during transit, it actually got stolen. So before it ever hit his actual business office, it left the truck and was not seen for many months. Well, he has the call home feature on it, to where eventually what ended up happening was somebody turned it on at a pawn shop, which was on an Indian reservation. And it called home, and so they go down there and say, "This is mine, here's my receipt. I never received it. I need this laptop." They turn it on and then instantly see CPKP, unfortunately, which is child pornography, kiddie porn. So then other law enforcement got into it because there's a jurisdictional issue on Indian reservations. But the only reason he was able to find a laptop is because of the call home feature. And the reason why they weren't able to find it before was because the individual didn't hook it up to the internet. So they're probably doing is they turned on the laptop and then just started downloading stuff directly to the system.
How did the call home feature give away the geographical location?
The IP address of the system, and then you call up the IP address, or the ISP that owns the IP address, and then say, is this a commercial account? Or if you have the IP address, you can sometimes scan it and see who owns it. Because some people will have, for example, a block of 8 IP addresses, and they'll have a web server internally. So depending on where it is, you can get some information without even having to go to the ISP.
If you go on websites, like Aaron, you can type in, like if you know an address for Verizon, you can type that address into Aaron's, and it will it'll tell you exactly who it belongs to.
Yeah. That and like the central op actually uses Aaron. But let's, who has a good company name that is well known? As I should do Google.
How about me?
Is it CH for tech?
Yeah.
Hit enter, and these are the ranges that it has available to it, which is actually more than I was anticipating.
Yeah.
International. So from an yeah. So from an attacker perspective, this is one of the first things they'd look for. Now these are the ranges that we can start scanning specifically for this organization. Or they could say the IP address range is going to be in, say one that has a geographic location to it, like Bethesda. If it's in here, then you know at least what city it's probably in, type scenario. A lot of people in their RARPs, which is basically reverse ARP, or address resolution protocol, basically what ends up happening is a lot of people will put the physical location of the router or whatnot, so whenever you're doing a trace route, sometimes you can find out where the geographic location is there as well, such as like level 3, any of the big backbone companies, they'll say, for example, like Texas or Austin or Denver, so you can see what city they're in. But again, that's not going to pinpoint it about what actual building it's in, per se, but it does tell you who to call. Yeah. So it tells you to call, and then from there you just move on and say that the system's been stolen, here's the receipt, here's the software and whatnot. And sometimes you'll get lucky, and the ISP will say, well, this has been stolen, you never got a report of finding it, you've already reported it with law enforcement, and then they'll work with law enforcement to get the information. But if you're not lucky, they'll just say, come back to us with the search warrant, have a nice day. So one thing with the eCPA, what it'll come down to is that there's an issue where if law enforcement comes to an organization and says, we want to do an investigation on this IP address or this user account, then from that point back, the ISP now has to store all the records that they currently have and basically back up that content for the individual. But the law enforcement can't come back and say, we want the rest of the records from that point on without making another official request. So they have to basically reset the timestamp of information that's being held. Okay, in this area as well, there's tracing software and encryption. Best protection for sensitive data is basically just to encrypt it. Basically, when you encrypt data at rest, it's probably going to be a symmetric key. So if you do not secure your symmetric key, then it's basically going to be useless. So when it comes down to it, is if your symmetric key is on a USB thumb drive, secure your USB thumb drive away from your actual laptop. Okay, in this area, going to cover power issues, fire prevention, detection, and of course, suppression.
Sorry, Jeremy, isn't the problem with encryption, just on the previous line, that it's only encrypted at rest or in a power off state, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, because once you're
Yes.
authenticated and powered on, it's not encrypted.
Right, and that's an issue for, it's trying to protect it once you turn the system off and you're not using it and you have it in your hotel room and you leave and you don't lock it up for whatever reason, that if somebody comes in and steals it, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get the information. Again, depending on how high valued of a target you are for whatever competitor you may have, that's actually a very viable attack that, for example, let's say there's a information security conference or some other industry segment conference that's bringing in hundreds or thousands of people into a specific area. If they know that you're coming in, what room you're going to be staying in or what floor, they'll wait till you leave and then break into your room and try to steal anything that they can. And a lot of times they don't want you to know that anything was stolen, so they'll try to either reproduce it right then and there or take it off site, reproduce it, and then put it back in. So police reports aren't pushed and you don't report anything interesting or strange happening to it. So if you encrypt the data at rest when the system's off, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to get to. Like BlackBerries, for example. People lose those all the time or they get stolen. And when they're off, there should be encryption on the data at rest. And that's one of the nice things is because it uses ECC cryptography, elliptical curve cryptography, which is basically it's a lower footprint and it's more secure than the bigger algorithms, mainly because the math's harder. It's no longer dealing with the large prime numbers. It's dealing with a completely different algorithm. And if you get the phone while it's still on, of course you can scroll through things, grab things while it's off, but the whole trick is the phone either should be off, turned off, or logged off. So when somebody does steal it from you, it's going to be useless to them.
Same as PGP, right? If you encrypt the hard drive on power,
Yeah.
if you put in your password, if you don't have a screensaver,
Just like on TrueCrypt.
it's not encrypted, right?
Yeah, same thing in TrueCrypt. When you mount the file and then you go into it, while it's mounted, it's completely unencrypted. But when you close it down, it is encrypted. How many people here have heard of the plausible deniability issue with TrueCrypt? Basically, it has it to where there's two passwords. So let's say you have a 2 gig file, which is going to be your 2 gig virtual disk or virtual drive or whatnot. And then you have the two passwords. One password is going to be your quote-unquote like primary. So you put a few files on it, and then basically you log out, log in with your second. Then what it's going to do is it's going to use the rest of the space that you didn't use in your primary, and then you can dump all the rest of your files onto it. And so if anybody asks specifically for the password for that TrueCrypt mount, then if you give them the first one, they're not going to see the contents from the secondary drive, basically. But the fun part about it is it's variable. So the more you put on the first part, the less you have available in the second, because the size of the file is not going to change. And the whole issue is plausible deniability. Going back to a lot of people were saying that you have to give the password, period. If, for example, law enforcement came to you and said, I want the username and password for this drive, people were saying, we're pleading the fifth, and it didn't go through. They said, you have to give it or you're in contempt of court. The caveat to that is, there was an individual that was suspected of basically bringing child pornography in from the Canadian border into the U.S. He went through customs. They said, turn on your laptop. We want to see what's on it. They were going through, and he had hard disk encryption. So what he ended up doing was he went to a place that, from a criminal aspect, he probably shouldn't have gone, because it's just, you know where your bad stuff is. The law enforcement agent saw it, and he said, that's bad. I'm going to get somebody. The guy turns the computer off. And then, of course, the law enforcement guy said, well, turn it back on. So it turns it back on, asks for the password, said, give me the password.
Guy that turns it off.
Or it could have been, yeah.
It was the security, the border agent that turns it off.
Was-
After he saw it,
Okay.
he closed it, and that's when it turned off afterwards.
Yeah, because it ended up turning off and basically encrypted everything again. And they said, give me the password. And the guy goes, no, I plead the fifth. And usually that didn't fly until this precedent, which basically it went through the courts. And he said, well, it's self-incrimination if I give the password, because I know there's illegal stuff on the drive. And now it basically makes it to where that plausible deniability issue is not as big of a problem as it used to be. Because before, you had to give the drive or else potential contempt of court or whatnot. Was that?
The court agreed.
Yeah. And so that opens up a huge precedent. Yeah. And I hate to say it, sometimes it does take criminals to help shape the law in the favor of an actual defendant. Because when it comes down to it, that whole plausible deniability issue, I know there's ways to find out there's two keys. But again, it's level of effort. Because the majority of law enforcement that you're going to come across, especially if they're quote-unquote computer experts, propeller heads or whatnot, they're going to see this encrypted file. They're going to say, give me the password. You give it to them. That's all they really care about, is now they see the data on this encrypted drive. And if they say, give us the second password, you could probably get away with saying, what second password? I just know that there's a first one. Then they would have to do the forensic investigation and try to find the second password. And in reality, most people do not go that much in depth during an investigation. I wish they would, but it's just there's time, budget, constraints, things like that. They have 20 cases behind them. They just want to see what's there, visible. They don't see anything damaging or anything. So then they close the file and then move on. So yeah, with the encryption, it's going to be level of effort. Because if you are, again, making nukes in your basement, they're going to spend a lot of level of effort trying to get or prove you're doing something bad, because chances are you probably are. But again, with that scenario, before it was, if you didn't give the password, it was a very bad thing. Now some people are actually getting away with, do the Fifth Amendment, saying self-incrimination. But yeah, as far as the data at rest encryption, it is only encrypted while the system's off. I have come across a scenario to where an individual was using a company asset or a business asset, business laptop. And they were on site in a remote area, and they were going places where they shouldn't have gone. Well, they were giving access to this laptop, which had hard disk encryption on it, to other individuals that did not have the best interest of the business in mind, basically. They were of a competing business. So what ended up happening was this person, of course, wants to date this lady. So he lets her log onto his laptop and do all kinds of chat. So he puts in his password and basically decrypts his entire hard drive for this essential enemy. So what it comes down to, the person who was using the laptop, who the laptop was assigned to, was, of course, upset when he gets fired, saying that, why should I get fired? Because all I did was unencrypt my laptop and give it to a competitor. And that's a bad thing. Yeah. Yeah. And it was one of the things to where only he was allowed to use his laptop, and even let his daughter use it to do chat. MySpace, which I have seen malware across MySpace before, just evident. And then same thing with Yahoo Chat, MSN Chat. Sometimes malware has been known to transfer through those mediums as well. So it's just not logistically feasible or security feasibly smart to allow just anybody and everybody to access the system. And the reason why it was encryption on data at rest was secure it. And then he bypassed it.
That's the point of the use guidance, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's the acceptable use is only the person authorized to use the device can use it. And it's encrypted for a reason because we only want you to be able to use it.
I'll tell you what encryption, real life story, we actually implemented holistic encryption software, centralized keys. So you couldn't have, anybody could be carrying around their keys with them or anything. We just had to know that password. And 3 days after doing it, we had actually implemented it because the federal government was requiring it for our consultants going in there on our contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And so we pushed it out to all of our government consultants. And then we started rolling it out to smaller groups who thought we needed like internal financial people or legal department. 3 days after legal installed it, one of our chief counsels lost his laptop and it worked. And he was wiping his brow saying, thank God they had this encrypted, you know. So he had all kinds of sensitive legal documents on it.
Yeah. And
It does work.
And then there was the, what was it, about a month ago? Everybody hear about the TSA incident? They lost their laptop? Yeah. It was the people that pay the extra money to go through that. Was it Clear Blue or it's that service? Which one? Yeah, it's the area to where if you travel a lot, you can bypass a lot of the lines and go directly to the TSA line for busy people, I guess. Well, they have this line. Fly Clear or something. They have a separate system outside the other screening system, which has more information because you pay for the service, and then you give them things like your name, your address, sometimes even a picture ID.
You do a retina scan.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of content on there. Well, they misplaced a laptop for several days. And the funny part about it was they were going around saying that there's no proof that anybody was able to get any content off of it because our investigation shows that nobody touched the laptop. Well, if you get a write blocker, you hook it up to a hard drive, you can make a bitstream copy of the hard drive and not touch the or basically change the data at all. So there's no proof that you were ever there when it comes down to it. So there are systems out there that should have hard disk encryption, and my understanding was the big issue, why that was a scary thing, is because it did not have hard disk encryption on it. And that type of data should. Because if you have social security numbers out there, picture IDs, or pictures of the individual, retina scan information, or whatever type of biometric information, you can easily make fake IDs or identity theft. And there's thousands of people's info on there. Okay, facility attributes. The heating and air conditioning. This right here is a lot of people don't give it a second thought or as much as they should, but basically gives positive air pressure. Basically, air goes out when the door opens. Also protects intake vents. You also need to dedicate power lines specifically to the Havoc. And then if main power is lost, it will not affect the HVAC systems. And then emergency switch off valve, basically necessary to doing a fire if a malicious substance is found in the building. Again, like when the post offices had the anthrax, if you were able to turn off the Havoc systems, it wouldn't spread throughout the building. It basically all settle down. One thing as well, people don't usually push through for HVAC systems, is if you want to secure an environment. A lot of these HVAC systems have this really thin metal, and sound bounces very well through a lot of these ventilation systems. So, for example, I'm in this room, somebody else is in a room across the hall or whatnot. If they're listening, there's a good possibility they can hear what we're saying just by listening to what's going through the ventilation system. Some people will actually put substances around on the insides, the vents. Basically, it's a voice cancellation or noise cancellation type of substances, possibly rubber or whatnot. So anybody, if they say anything, it's basically going to hit the corner and just basically dampen itself. So you're protecting this room from things that could be heard in the other room, which doesn't necessarily mean that if you have sensitive equipment that you still can't pick up the information going back and forth, but it's going to make sure that when you're talking, that a lot less information is going to be passed to people without special equipment. There's the water and gas lines. You need shut-off valves, basically necessary if a line breaks. This happens a lot in northern areas if you don't have the proper insulation. freezing hits the pipes and then bursts. There's also positive flow. Material should flow out of the building, not into it. Okay, electrical power, basically a primary source. It provides the day-to-day use and needs dedicated feeders from utility substations. There's also alternative power sources. Backup powers in the event of failure of the primary source. A lot of places will have generators. I know the majority of hospitals, if not all of them, have very large generators, basically making it to where when the power goes out in the geographic grid or whatnot in that town, the hospital can still flow and gets their life support still running and other items. You have your UPSs. You have your online UPSs. Primary power source goes through this type of UPS consistently. They're more expensive and takes on the load more quickly than a standby UPS. Standby UPSs are monitors power line and switches to batteries and power, and basically it's when the power is lost, that's when they boot up and come onto life. One thing you will notice though, and when I was mentioning about unplugging like a Windows workstation for forensic investigation, if you were ever to do that, you want to unplug it from the back of the computer as opposed to from the wall outlet to the computer. Because a lot of times they may have a UPS in the system, and if you unplug the power from the UPS to the wall, it's then going to send commands to the actual computer, and it's going to change the evidence. Because a lot of them have monitoring software and whatnot on there, and it says, okay, at this specific time, we just lost power, now the UPS is kicking on. So that's another reason why you want to unplug it, but unplug it from the back of the computer, not the back of the wall. And also have another feeder from the utility substation as a secondary backup. And when it says another feeder from utility substation, one thing that you want to make sure happens basically with all routes is you want to have a different substation or a different route. This happens a lot with like T1 lines or whatnot, or T3 or whatever your internet connection is going to be, where people will get what they think is going to be secondary or a dual route, and it's going to the same exact pop. So right after that pop, when the backhoe digs up the fiber or digs up the cable line, then both lines go down. Even if you're going through, for example, you're going through Quest or Roadrunner or Comcast or whatever broadband provider that you're going to be using, a lot of times the smaller companies or even larger companies or different companies are using the same backbone, which is the grid or the infrastructure is owned by one major company. So they're using the same lines. So you want to make sure that the last mile is rerouted in different directions. I know a lot of organizations will have it, let's say if they're on a highway, let's go north and south. They'll want it to where there's a pipe going both north and south. Whenever they tie into it, one line for the fibers going north, one line's going south. So if one actually does have to get chopped, then it automatically feeds over to the secondary. But completely opposite directions. Okay, problem with steady power current. You have electrical power issues. You can have powers from utility feeders is not always consistent and clean. I have had this system happen before to where there's an upstream station, and it was about 5:30 every day. This organization always got data loss. So they'd be working their application, then instantly start to get errors at basically the exact same time every single day, Monday through Friday, Saturdays and Sundays. Then, of course, again, they start blaming the software. It ended up being, we had to bring in several individuals on their side because they didn't want to bring us on site. But it was one of the substations basically clicking over from one piece of equipment to another, and then a surge went down the line. So the power was not clean, and it ended up affecting all the network devices online, and then destroying the data at that time. So if you are getting consistent data loss, consistent system basically going down, let's say once a month, they might be doing a test or whatnot. And then once a month, you start losing a switch or a router. There's a very good possibility you could be getting some sort of surge. So if they do not have clean power, definitely filter it, because that's going to prevent a lot of that from happening. But there's a very good possibility that just happens by default. Okay, power problems can cause hardware to degrade and prompt data loss, voltage fluctuation, and then also any device that generates an electromagnetic field, radio signal in a specific frequency can interrupt the current traveling through the power lines. And then how many people know what basically electromagnetic frequency interference is? And basically it happens to where there's multiple different types of interference. It could just be from, for example, like the radio waves going through the air, could interfere with what's going on, for example, like a Cat5 cable or Cat3. Was that? Yeah. EMI. There's EMPs. Those are good ones as well. But when it comes down to it, is there's multiple ways to interfere with digital signal. Okay. The havoc. Heating and air conditioning systems. Basically, they can't control high humidity. High humidity does cause corrosion. It can also control low humidity. This does not cause corrosion. This causes static electricity. If you're in a dry area, for example, Colorado Springs, definitely a dry area. Unfortunately, for example, in my house, we've gone through about 8 DVD players in the last 2 years because going from the couch to the DVD player gets opened up with static electricity. As soon as we touch the device, then it goes away. So have anti-static devices is definitely, or anti-static mats. Anti-static carpet is definitely a good thing to have in specific areas. And having a carpeted server room is probably not the best idea, but I have seen it before. Yeah, sweaters. And you don't want to go in a server room with a balloon, do this with your hair, and then touch devices. Okay, prevention against static electricity. Use an anti-static flooring in data processing centers and wear anti-static bands when working inside computer systems. Unfortunately, that is not as popular as it used to be. Before, a lot of the electronic systems, or computers, especially 10, 15 years ago, were extremely sensitive to static electricity. So they were blowing all the time. And they were very expensive. So a lot of people, when they broke something, if it was going to have to be repaired and it's $10,000 to fix the system, they were a lot more likely to use these anti-static devices. I've seen a lot of times, especially in server rooms, where there's a lot of static electricity going through. People don't suit up. They don't do anything to prevent any static electricity from destroying the device. So that is something that's it's not as pushed as it used to, because a lot of the electronics are less sensitive as they used to be, but it's still a very dangerous item. I had a situation where, granted it was only a workstation, but again, was working on it, had the case open, and was trying to basically get memory, take it out, and then switch in some good memory. Well, I ended up touching the wrong thing. It sparked basically 2 memories and destroyed one of the pieces of memory, which is relatively cheap. But when it comes down to it, like 10, 15 years ago, what was it, $100 per meg? Now it's what, 5 cents per meg? So you're looking at a 2 gig stick and it's only 30, 40 bucks. So again, it's a lot less expensive, but still damaging. Most computers have internal sensors or heating sensors. And for example, if it goes above 88 degrees Celsius, then it sets off an alarm that the system is either A, going to shut down so it doesn't kill the processor, or should give some sort of alarm to like a sysadmin saying that the system is about to fail. So yeah, there should be some sort of monitoring.
It's not covered somewhere else?
So that's the beautiful part about it. It's covered in every domain. The monitoring, basically for the auditing purposes, for like telecommunications and whatnot. But yeah, you should always log everything that you can, because the more information, the better. And then, so you'd be alerting, logging, and then monitoring those logs. And in theory, in the perfect world, you're not going to get very many logs or many alerts. And then the one super person is going to be looking at it and saying, well, let's fix it right then and there. But in reality, a lot of times you get so much information in these logs, you have to have like aggregators or even correlation utilities that would go through and say, okay, we know that these 25,000 medium alerts happened. Now we're going to correlate this data log with this data log, and we're only going to really do anything if these mediums happen to hit a high on this log, which is going to be, for example, like firewall scans or firewall logs along with a switch log or event viewers. So, okay, fire prevention. Look for the approach to fire safety. Fire prevention can be accomplished through proper building construction and wiring, developing and implementing safety procedures, training employees, and housekeeping, supplies, and combustibles. Basically means that if you have a good old daisy chain of power supplies like we do here, you do not want to have a bunch of napkins, pieces of paper strung all around these things, because if it does spark, those are the first things that are going to catch. Unfortunately, we're coming near Christmas time, and a lot of times during Christmas, people have real trees. They don't water the trees, or the water dries up too quickly. The trees die, get really brittle, flammable, and a lot of people overload the trees with lights, or they just don't have proper wiring in their house. And a simple spark can easily catch one of those up on fire as well. And that's something, same type of environment in a building, is that if you have a coffee pot right next to your garbage, if something like that just happens to spark because somebody spilled the coffee or it was left on too long, and let's say the glass goes everywhere, it happens to cut something such as a wire, crosses the wires, and then sparks. Definitely a big issue. 4 legs of fire. It needs heat, fuel, oxygen, and possibly a chemical reaction. The oxygen is a big issue, and that's another reason why Havoc needs its own separate power source. Fire prevention measures. Basically, you can do a reduction in temperature, remove the fuel, disrupt the possible chemical combustion, and also remove the oxygen. So if you still have the Havoc running in the system, you can either turn it off so it's not like no longer getting new oxygen into the flames. And then also the issue is if there's toxins in the air, you're not pumping it into the rest of the building or the rest of the facility. Okay, fire detection. There's a fire detection system. This can be configured to call the fire station with a pre-recorded message, and also shut down the Havoc. And then detector placement. Basically, this is on and above suspension ceilings, and then you're looking at below laser floors and in air ducts. And why would you want it in air ducts? Yep. Those you'd usually want the smoke sensors, and the ones on the ceilings you're probably going to want your good old heat sensors, because if the flames are getting high enough, then it's going to burn through the device and then launch everything. This page right here is something you basically just need to memorize. It's the A is going to be for your common combustibles, your paper, your wood, and you're going to have things like water or soda acid. Your class B is going to be your good old liquids, things that bubble. There's CO2, M200. CO2 is probably one of your more common ones. And same thing with class C. This is going to be your electrical. And in electrical, you're going to have your class C. You have your halons, but the halons actually is now illegal, and that's something you need to basically memorize for the test as well. And the reason why it's basically been taken off the market, or you're no longer able to use that in server rooms or anywhere in general, asphyxiation.
After you remove the oxygen from the air.
Is the battery replaced? Or
Yeah,
okay.
It's where I stopped, so you can continue.
Oh. Yeah, from top on this page. Okay, fire types. Class A is going to be your basic combustibles, getting water. Class B is your liquids. One easy way is Class B for bubble. And that's going to be your good old CO2. Class C for electrical. Some people will actually do like a crackle sound because the sparks, when they go through, they crackle. So that could be an easy way to remember it as well. Same thing is going to be CO2 and halon. That's something you definitely cannot use anymore because it becomes more toxic and more deadly to the human life, or basically any biological life, once it hits a certain temperature than the fire is actually going to be. And then D. It's important to know D, but in real life you're probably not going to come across it unless you're in specific environments, and that's going to be your combustible metals, such as magnesium, sodium, and potassium, and basically you have to use some sort of dry chemical to counteract that. Because how many people here have played with magnesium sticks or anything like that? I know that, for example, in survival kits they have it where if you're camping, you shave off some pieces of magnesium, and then you try to start the magnesium with flint shavings. And then, yep. What was that? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Steel wool. Makes it to where they'll burn when it's wet. There's very few ways that you can turn it down. And then, of course, good old thermite. When they were trying to pour water on that. Yeah. It's basically you just have to wait for the stuff to burn out on that aspect.
What about motors and
Magnesium is airplane brakes. And when they catch on fire, they're put out. Or even with the chemicals.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the instance to where the plane landed and basically sheared half the gears off because they couldn't get it down properly. Okay, fire extinguishers. Basically, there's the halogen fire extinguishers. It's basically used so that equipment is not damaged by the water. And there's the FM200, replacement for the halon with out ozone depleting chemicals, and used as chemicals instead of water as well. There's the CO2, or carbon dioxide. This does not leave residue after use and does not cause damage to sensitive devices, and also can suffocate people. How many people here have played with CO2 before? Yeah. There's many different uses for it. A lot of people even use it for paintball, and definitely freezes you pretty good. So definitely be careful when you're playing with the CO2. There's also dry chemicals, not effective against electrical fires. So again, if you have metal fires in your server room, you have more things to worry about than just your water extinguisher. This right here, something to basically memorize. The fire suppression types. You have your water types, which are going to be your wet pipe. This always contains water. Pipes can freeze and break, cause water leakage, most commonly used. Then there's the dry pipe. Dry pipe is water's not in the pipe. They release after a delay, which gives people enough time to basically say that there's a false alarm, please don't go off. And then there's the pre-action system. Water releases after a sprinkler head link is melted. Lets people react more quickly. And also the deluge system. Sprinkler head is open, releases a lot of water faster. So you can have a combination. For example, the slowest one is going to be your dry pipe and then pre-action, to where basically certain things are going to have to happen, then it's going to fill up, and then so forth. The extinguishers. Extinguishers should be placed within 50 feet of electrical equipment. Also expected 4 times a year. How many people actually go through and inspect their fire extinguishers 4 times a year? So I know a lot of organizations, especially small and medium-sized companies, may not be able to get around to it once every 4 years, let alone 4 times a year. But definitely they should, because sometimes it may be to where chemicals change, or even the capability to push the stuff because there's a leak in the system. Yep, charge is gone. Okay, also clearly marked with unobstructed view, because a lot of people will put junk in front of them. Say it's right behind a filing cabinet, right above a filing cabinet, and they'll start to put stuff on top of it so it's harder to see. Easily reached. Again, if it's above a filing cabinet with a bunch of junk on the filing cabinet, it's not easy to see or easy to get to. And filled with the appropriate and approved suppression agent.